May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, doing our bit to help preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his. And anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today is going to be a memorial podcast for Dennis Marshall, who died in November. I'm going to start off now by reading the announcement, how I learned it in the Crestone Mountain Center, the Dharma Sangha News from Crestone Zen Mountain Center. And then I will read the emails between Dennis and me, which was like his interview. And then then you will be able to hear a replay of the podcast with him that was done in January of 2022, so almost 3 years ago. Here I will start. From the Crestone Mountain Zen Center News. We would like to let you know of the passing of longtime practitioner and Sangha member Dennis Marshall. Dennis died on November 26th, just 2 days before what would have been his 93rd birthday. His time in the Sangha dates back to the early days of the San Francisco Zen Center. He moved to Crestone in the early 90s and since then had a continuous presence at Crestone Mountain Zen Center. He was a resident here for some time and then steadily continued to attend sesshin and other events after leaving. He was well known in the small Crestone community. On the morning of November 30th, Baker Roshi led the cremation funeral service for him here in Crestone. Members of the Crestone community, some of whom had known Dennis for years and some who were new friends, joined with the resident CMZC Sangha to commemorate him. We bow to Rei-un Mitsu Zen. So, and I would see Dennis when I was in Crestone. He was a really, really nice guy. He was from, I'm sure in what I read, I'll probably go over this or in our podcast, but he was from someplace in England where I would get him. I first met him at Green Gulch. It said he was there from the early days of Zen Center. We'll see what he says in the interviews. But I remember him at Green Gulch in the 70s, I think. And I would get him to talk like the obscure place in England he came from, and I could not understand it. It was so neat to hear him talk that way. Anyway, I will go now to the interview made out of emails between Dennis Marshall and DC. And I say it all started, but this is off Cuke.com. It all started with, from Dennis on in 2005 to me. Hi, David. Had to resend this to your alternate email address. Hello from Crestone, Colorado. I just ran across the web page while doing research to find a Japanese publication, Ono and Hibono's Godai-san, Tokyo 1942, for a project I'm working on. Interesting to catch all the names from way back when, blasts from the past. Well, he's talking about getting on Gook.com, obviously. I've just read the Maggie Kress interview. Did I pick up a minor error? It said something about added material 25th of March 05. That's only 3 days ago. Maybe it's correct, but top of same page referred to March 2004. Probably a typo. Hey, Dennis, we'll get right on it. I see the Crestone Zen folk from time to time, both Crestone Mountain Zen Center and Steve Angelique. What he's talking about there is Steve Allen's group, like he says right here, but mostly socially. Steve Allen's group poured concrete the day before yesterday for the foundation of their new temple. And I always visit with Steve Allen and Angelique when I'm in Crestone, too. The last time was maybe 2013, maybe 2012. Might not ever get back there. Busy now, back to Dennis. Busy now, but I'll check the web page from time to time. It's not a web page, Dennis, it's a website. I'm traveling a lot these days. In a couple of weeks to Maui, where my wife's daughter has just given birth to twins. Then over to UK, where I have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. But I'm here sometimes. Let me know if you're ever in Crestone. I have also been reading the FK interview. A long time since I saw F, but I visited her in Santa Fe with Jerome when Jerome was visiting Crestone. Oh, I know who he's talking about. It's a woman who lives in Santa Fe that likes to remain anonymous, who was a very strong early student of Shunryu Suzuki. And then he says, oh, I hear dogs outside. I'm not going to stop. I've been reading some of your Sangha news. If you're in touch with Claude and Ardella, please give them my best wishes. I also remember Del Carlson and ache to read of his having been neglected. Yes, for the sake of auld lang syne. I remember a summer break concert at Tassajara when he sang a song, Oh, What Does a Fairy Do When He's 40? Or maybe it was 50. I don't think I was the only one with wet eyes. Well, now Claude has passed on. I was with him in hospice for a good deal of the time of his last days. Della has passed on. I used to visit her like once a month. Del Carlson passed on, and we spread his ashes here in Bali, or at least some of them. Del, what does a fairy do when he's 50? Oh, that's great. Eric Arno is in his 50s. I forgot there is such an age gap between us. I'm now 73, so that was 20 years ago. And he says, I think. Next year, I'm planning on a 3-month cross-country car trek across China. I'm indeed fortunate to enjoy such good health. You know, Dennis, I never knew where his money was coming from. I mean, he was always just barely surviving, but he got a home not very far from Crestone Mountain Zen Center. You could walk there. I've walked to it, said hello. Anyway, I say, Dennis, I remember sending Jerome a postcard from Jerome somewhere, maybe Colorado, decades ago. Yeah, I did. I was passing through a town called Jerome. Oh, it could have been somewhere in the Southwest. It went through a town called Jerome. And so he was living in the Page Street Zen Center, so I just got the postcard and said, "Hi, Jerome, thinking of you while we're in your namesake town." And Dennis writes back, "Thanks for your reply, David. Sure, use the message if you wish." Oh, I had asked if I could post it. "I've been here in Crestone since 1991. I first moved here to practice at Crestone Mountain Zen Center. After leaving, I built my own house. Jerome was here the week we poured the foundation." Oh, far out. Man, that's a long time ago. "I was first at SFZC, San Francisco Zen Center, in late 1971, I think. My first sesshin was the one during which Suzuki Roshi died." Oh, okay. Yeah, that was December. Suzuki Roshi died at the very first of the first period on December 4th, 1971. The three people who later sat Tangaryo with me at Tassajara included Steve Allen, now my neighbor in Crestone, and the other names I forget. "I was still at Tassajara for the practice period when you were head monk." Yeah, so that's 1974 spring. "As to shared memories, I remember your weeks of silence at Page Street, corresponding and writing." It wasn't weeks, it was 6 months. "Man, you needed to write those 2 books. He's talking about Crooked Cucumber and Thank You and Okay, An American Zen Failure in Japan. Now I'm engaged on one of my own, but perhaps more about that later. By chance, just this morning I had a phone call from Jerome, who keeps sending me materials on China to spur me on in my project." And then he sent me an email that said only, "It's snowing like crazy here today in the Rockies." And I write back, "I was in Crestone a year ago visiting with Paul Shippey, Steve, Dan Welsh, and folks at Dick's Place. Saw Rowena Pate, met with Trungpa students to see video in progress on the Karmapa, I think. Next time, I hope to see you." Oh, I didn't see him that time. Then he wrote me, "My memories of Suzuki Roshi are slight, but nonetheless treasured. He was already ill when I first went to Page Street. Told by my roommate, who was probably fed up with my fecklessness, that I ought to visit Zen Center. I went to several Suzuki Roshi lectures. One of them, I think, was his You're Seeing the World Through Pink Spectacles lecture. I was very taken with him and by the refinement of the Page Street environment. This must have been either Suzuki Roshi's final summer or the one before that. Dick Baker was in Japan. Yeah, well, he was in Japan till November of 71. To a new student, somewhat mythic heir apparent figure. After some months in a Page Street apartment, I moved into the building. Suzuki Roshi came to some meals, sitting at the top table, but the only time I spoke with him was at a question-answer Q&A session in the dining room. I no longer remember what it was I asked him about. He wasn't taking new students at that time, and we newcomers had to make do with Katagiri, Silas, et al. I remember filing through Suzuki Roshi's room the sesshin morning he died. I also remember the subsequent funeral. It's some measure of how profoundly he affected people that although many of us were relatively new students who had had little personal contact with him, we were deeply grief-stricken. A question. Oh, I asked him, where were you born and what happened up to the time you came to Zen Center? And what made you interested in Zen? You seemed to be adept at abbreviated telling. And he says, for your archive, why? In brief, I was down and almost out, but was just beginning to scratch my way back. I was born in England, 1931, had a career as a journalist, Fleet Street, London, and then went to Jamaica to help midwife Jamaican independence for the colonial office. Information officers, sort of junior diplomatic corps, but the bureaucracy got to me. I jumped ship. I was also at the end of a marriage, 2 young sons, became freelance BBC correspondent, etc., and hightailed it to California, arriving in Haight-Ashbury the year before the hippie thing came into existence, 1964. Lived the beatnik existence in Haight for several years, had a breakdown, was hospitalized, then halfway housed. While in the halfway house, met Steve Weinstein, doing his selective service stint as a counselor. I think he means Steve Weintraub. That's very interesting. Though that isn't what took me to Zen Center. A year or two later, I found my way to Zen Center. A good job I did. Now, that's interesting. The first time I heard of the San Francisco Zen Center was some years earlier, probably 1968 in the Haight. I ran the Weed Patch at Haight and Masonic, a sort of head shop, though didn't deal in drugs, international tobacco store. In those days, we pretty much all smoked cigarettes. One day, Tony Patchell came in as a customer, mentioned Zen Center. I was mildly curious, but it wasn't until later, around 1970, with all the new agey stuff going on, Steve Gaskin, he says Gaskin TM, so that TM is Transcendental Meditation, Yogi Bhajan, gurus galore. When I was shopping around and being turned off by most all groups, that I went to the ZC. I didn't know my ass from my elbow, or Buddhism from Hinduism. In fact, the entire mysterious East thing scared me, but I liked what I saw in Suzuki Roshi. That, I think, must be more than enough. An inglorious past, but perhaps not as untypical of Zen students at the time, or some of them, as I sometimes think. I was, of course, a bit older than most new students. As to the abbreviated telling, as you put it, well, I was, perhaps still am, a journalist, and for the past 15 years I have copy-edited books for university presses, Johns Hopkins University Press, Columbia UP, U of Virginia P, etc. And I always liked the ink spots. Hey, that's a good conclusion. I always liked the ink spots. The ink spots were a great band, and they go way back. They were black. They might have even started in the late 30s, 40s. Maybe they didn't start till the 50s. But their big song, which is really one of the, it's in your lists of biggest songs of all time, is the fantastic If I Didn't Care. Great song. Anyway, in a subsequent email, Dennis, mainly dealing with technical problems we were having, he says, this seems to be my week for reconnecting with Zen friends. An hour ago, Michael Sawyer phoned. It's been years. A month or more ago, I left a message at Green Gulch seeking his number. I may have a commission for him, artwork, if he's well enough to do it. Michael died from Parkinson's, I think it was. Long ago. DC, I say, I liked the ink spots too and saw them with maybe no original members in the early 70s in Monterey with Charles and Carolyn Page, Bill Winter, can't remember who else. If I Didn't Care is one of the great classics in my book. They predate rhythm and blues, wouldn't you say? But at the same time, they helped to bring it all in. Predate. Well, rhythm and blues came out of... that might be true. Anyway, you were born in some town in some place in England where the language, as I can remember it, as you presented it to me, is unintelligible. Couldn't write out that sentence about coal oil or something, could you? Oh, boy. He does. All right, listen to this. So he writes, dialect from near Bradford in the West Riding of Yorkshire, as it was called, now designated West Yorkshire, UK central government, split Yorkshire, the biggest county, into 3 counties. I think it was Maggie Thatcher did it to cut us down to size. A Texan might understand that. I have little idea to spell it, but... All right, he wrote it out. We're dawn int coil oil. We're muck charch ont twinders. That we are, where no one can find us. I can sort of understand it. We're down in coal oil. We're muck clarts ont winders. We're muck clarts ont winders. That's we're W-E-E-R, yeah. It's like that's where we are, where no one can find us. Yorkies, and now it's him writing again. Yorkies, tykes, are renowned for their bloody-mindedness. Wonder what he means by that. But Yorkshire dialect is BBC English compared with that in Westmoreland, now redesignated Cumbria, where I went to boarding school. I was told that local shepherds were counting their sheep, recited Yant Tant Tithery Mithery. And then he writes 5, I forget, but I think single syllable. Arters, flarters, overs. Others. He wrote short O after it. Others. Dovers, dick. All right, I'm going to try to do that. And for 5, which she said a short symbol, I'll go th. Yant. Now, this is counting 10. Yant, tant, tithery, mithery, th. Arters, flarters, over, doovers, dick. That's really, some of the dialects in English. You know where I discovered English I couldn't understand? 1964, when I was in Mississippi helping out the civil rights thing there a little, mainly being in the way. I went down to the banks of the Mississippi in Natchez, where they'd sent me to be a spy. I went down to the banks there and sat with, poor black people who lived right on the Mississippi and fished for food there. They did have a Coke machine, an old sort of rusted out one. They gave me a Coke, and there was no talk of money. I had a guitar with me, and I played them some songs, and I asked them if they knew anybody. I couldn't understand them when they talked. Their dialect was, we basically didn't talk. It was sort of like being in a foreign country and sort of indicating a few things with words to each other. Mainly we were quiet. Anyway, so I say to Dennis, and this is the end of it, it warms the cockles of my heart to hear you say that, so to speak again, and thanks for the counting system and for getting in touch. So, now I will insert the podcast talk done with Dennis a year and a half ago. I'm going to take out just the talk with Dennis There'll be other stuff before it. But it's long, so this could be a long podcast, but what the heck? I mean, the whole podcast with him was 2 hours and 16 minutes and 28 seconds. I changed my mind. I'll just make this the podcast for today, and I'll put his up tomorrow. I mean, you could go back and find it, but I'll just make it an encore and put it up tomorrow. Okay, so anyway, you can listen to his podcast tomorrow, and this is the end of the podcast for today, except for the formal farewell. It's been a pleasure being with you. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogge Bandita, Feline Manicita, Guest Dogge Boombita, and dear lovely Katrinka arrived in America yesterday, and she'll be gone 39 days. So she's here with us in spirit, and we're all wishing you a grand awakening.